Hello and welcome to the next Landscape Builder tutorial. In this tutorial we'll be taking a look at the new Topography layers system. Take a look at the first Topography tutorial if you haven't already, as this tutorial assumes you know all of the stuff from the first one. So to begin with, I'm going to be creating a new landscape. It's going to be 4 kilometers by 4 kilometers, just at the origin, and a terrain width of 2 kilometers. Settings for the terrain just as normal, but I've set the base map distance up to 5,000 just so it looks a bit better. So I'm just going to go ahead and generate that landscape view round. I'm going to set up the scene lighting to start with. And then in texturing, because this isn't a texturing tutorial, I'm just going to have a very basic texture so that we can see just what's happening. The grass hill albedo texture with a normal map. Tiling of 25 by 25 as the default. Constant influence, noise turned off, and then I'm going to texture the landscape. So now we're going to go into topography. So with the new layer system, it may look extremely complicated, but don't panic. It doesn't have to be. It has a lot more features now, and you can do a lot more stuff, but you can still work in exactly the same way you did with the old value-based system if you prefer. So to start with, I'm going to show you the simplest way to use the new layer system. So step 1, add a new layer by clicking this plus button up the top. You can remove them by pressing the minus button on the side, hide them by clicking the hide button, and disable them by unticking it, or remove it also by pressing the cross on the side. Step 2, choose a base layer preset. So any of these presets down here that have the word base after them. So I'm going to click the Gentle Valleys base preset, similar to the one in the old system. And step 3, click Generate Height Map. And voila, you have a new landscape, and it is that simple. If you just stay with a single Perlin base layer, you can use it in exactly the same way you did before with the old value-based noise. All the old values are still in there under like advanced settings and curve modifiers and all of that stuff. But the layer system has the feature set to be used far more powerfully than that. So what we are using here is a Perlin base layer. Along with the image base layer you can see here, it forms the foundation of the layer system. In each topography, you'll usually just have just one of these layers, either a Perlin base layer or an image base layer. These layers are used to form the very basic shape of your topography. You should make sure, however, that this layer is always the first layer, like layer 1, as I've got it here. The second type of layer you can have are the additive layers. So that's the Perlin additive layer and the image additive layers. So I'm going to add an additive layer, Perlin additive, and I'm just going to disable it for now. Additive layers are used to add different topography features onto your landscape, like a mountain or a canyon, for instance. To demonstrate this, I'll set the Perlin base layer to Desert Floor Base and generate the height map. Now I'll set this additive layer to Mountain Range Additive, using that preset thing again. And I'm going to set the additive amount to 0.75 and generate. So now you can see that our topography has had some mountains added to it. Where the mountain topography is lower than the base layer is shown instead. So we get our base layer here with the mountains added on top in some areas. If I increase the additive amount, say to 0.85, and generate that, we not only get taller mountains, but more of the landscape has the mountains on top. So the additive amount controls how much of the mountain range layer we get showing through the base layer. If I change the height scale, say I up it to 1.75 and click generate, the height scale, it generally affects just how tall the mountains are, not how much area they cover. So in this example here, the mountains have gotten taller, but they haven't covered more area. So I'll set those values back to 1.3 and 0.75, generate it again. In general, additive layers behave almost identically to base layers except for their additive features. You control these features through the additive amount you've just seen, the remove base noise checkbox here, and the restrict area feature. So I'm going to talk about the restrict area feature first. It's used to confine the additive layer to a specific area. So if I enable it, you'll see there are a number of options exposed. So I'll first click Enable Area Picker. You can see that there's a green square that's shown up. This shows the area the additive layer will affect. You can drag it around with the handles. I can move it around numerically in the Landscape Builder window with these values, and also resize it from here. So I can change it to 2000 by 2000. So I'll just move it over here, for instance. So now if I click Generate Height Map, the mountains are now confined to this specific area. You can see it a bit better if I click Disable Area Picker. So the area picker now does not show up in the editor, in the scene view. Increasing the blend rate to 0.75 makes it blend a bit better with the surrounding topography. As you can see, the edge where it blends in isn't as evident, but it will come at the cost of making the mountain slightly smaller. So you might want to, for instance, up the height scale a bit if you want it to be as big as it was before. If I decrease the blend rate, on the other hand, the smoothing rate will be faster, and so the edge will be more evident, but the mountain will be slightly bigger than before. So remove base noise, this option here, is used to remove the noise at the base layer and hence preserve the natural shape of your additive layer. By default, it is enabled. It's hard to see the effect it has with these layers I've got, so I'll change the base layer to Desert Base and the additive layer to Canyon Additive. There it is. There you go. I'll turn off the additive layer to start with and click Generate. So if I zoom out a bit, we can see our desert base layer showing up. So for the additive layer now, I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to set the height scale to 2 and the additive amount to 0.8. So the reason why I'm doing this is because the base layer I'm using is quite high. So I need to raise the additive layer heights so that they can still be shown above the base layer. Now I'll just choose some random noise offsets to get some variation. I'm going to pick -2000 and 3000, and then I'm going to click Generate. The important thing to note here is that these canyons that have now shown up with remove base noise turned on, the additive layer at the top here is still flat, even when it is added onto a very steeply inclined base layer. This is what I mean by preserving the shape of the additive layer. So no matter what it's added onto, it'll look like it does when it's a normal base layer. Now, when I turn off remove base noise, it won't do this. I will also need to decrease the height scale I'm going to drop it back down to 1 to compensate, as now it's going to be adding directly the heights to the base layer. When you've got remove base noise turned on, it subtracts the actual base noise off it so that the heights will be decreased a bit. But by turning it back off again, it's going to raise those heights again. So now I'm going to click generate. So as you can see, the canyon additive layer still shows through the base layer. However, now you can see over here, this ridge is now more steeply inclined, just as the base layer is. So it's the shape of the additive layer is now being influenced by the shape of the base layer, which in some cases is not what you wanted to do. For instance, if you had a very bumpy base layer, but you wanted some smooth mountains, you'd want to have remove base noise turned on so that the bumpiness of the base layer wouldn't affect your smooth mountains. So the third type of layer you can have are the subtractive layers. So Perlin subtractive and image subtractive. Basically, they are identical to the additive layers, but they subtract instead of adding to your topography. So if I turn this one to Perlin subtractive, you can see that now it is called subtractive amount instead of additive amount. Basically, just like the other layer types, like they come in Perlin and image variants, as I said before. But I won't go over them in this video, as their use case is basically the same as the additive layers. You use them in pretty much the same way. So the fourth and final type of layer are the detail layers. So detail layers, as their name suggests, are used to add extra small scale details to your topography. For this, I'll use a Swiss Mountains Perlin base layer. I'm going to remove the additive layer to start, and I'm going to click generate. So this looks fairly basic and rather unrealistic with all the smooth mountains, but this is what your base layer is for. So what I'm going to do to fix this is I'm going to add a Swiss detail layer. So I'm using the Swiss detail preset, and I'm going to click generate. So this adds a lot of small scale details that break up the smooth surface and give a more realistic, uneven feel. Like additive layers, detail layers have similar controls and behavior to base layers. So they have similar things like noise offset X, offset Z, octaves, tile size, blah blah blah. However, they also have a number of controls to assist with the implementation of their small scale. So the first of these can be found by opening up the advanced settings. So this one here, the downscaling property, is unique to detail layers and allows you to downscale the noise on all three world axes. For instance, if I set it to 128 times and then click generate, it will generate much smaller scale details, as you can see here. The details, if I had to zoom in a lot to see what's going on at this really small scale. However, consequently, if I set that to 8 times instead and then click generate, it's going to generate much larger scale details, as you can see here. The details are so large here that they're actually affecting the basic shape of the topography. So the other feature specific to detail layers are the layer filters. So you can find them by dropping down the curve modifiers and filters box here, and we can go ahead and add a layer filter. So layer filters allow you to restrict where the details appear in your topography. For instance, if I add a layer filter of the height type, I can restrict the detail to only appear between heights of 0 and 750 meters. So if I click generate, thing to note here is how the details have disappeared off the top of those high mountains, which are above 750 meters. This option here for the height curve basically allows you to specify the fall off of how those details are reduced near the edges of this 0 to 750 range. This is covered in a bit more detail in the manual. So to finish this tutorial, I'll give an overview on how to use image inputs in the new layer system. As I mentioned before, all of the Perlin layer types have a corresponding image layer type. For instance, this Perlin detail layer has a corresponding image detail layer. The image layers work in a similar way to how the old image-based topography worked before, but there are a few new features. For those who haven't used the old system, I'll be giving a quick overview on how to use the basic functionality specific to image layers. If you want a bit more info, you can check the manual. So I'll just remove these layers and add a new one. I'm going to make it an image base layer. So this image base layer has a few things. It has a slot for a texture, which will provide the basic height map data for the topography. So you can get images with this kind of data from websites like terrain.party. I'm going to use one that I already have. This one here, Grand Canyon 2 height map. Drag it into the slot. So for image source, I'm going to select terrain party, as that's I got it from the Terrain Party website, and I'm going to leave normalize input turned off. If your image is not from the terrain.party website, you choose the image source as default, and potentially turn on normalize input if the range of your image isn't from black to white, but instead dark grey to light grey, for instance. For me, I'm going to set the height scale to 0.5 to start with, as it suits the height scaling of this image a bit better. So I'll click generate. So from far away, this all looks good, but if we go up close, we'll notice that there are a lot of jagged edges. So this is a common problem in Unity. When getting an image off the internet or one that you've constructed yourself, the way that Unity imports it and the way that some photo editing programs import them means that either some detail is going to be removed through using lower bit color things, or from the resolution of your image not being high enough for your landscape. So the image base layers provide two ways to fix this: interpolation smoothing here and detail smoothing, which is found here. So interpolation smoothing effectively downscales the resolution of your topography so that your resolution of your topography is a good enough resolution to fit the resolution of your image, which removes the jagged edges, usually, while detail smoothing uses a matrix smoothing algorithm, which pretty much always removes the jagged edges. The only thing with the detail smoothing algorithm is that it may be a bit more performance heavy for your liking. So, but for me, I'm going to use detail smoothing, which I'll set to 0.1. So now if I generate the height map, all those jagged edges are removed. Just keep in mind that using smoothing removes detail, and thus you really want to keep the smoothing values as low as you possibly can. Like, for instance, don't use 0.5 if 0.1 will do. So, for instance, if I set detail smoothing all the way up to 1, and then click generate for that, not only does it take longer, but although it looks really smooth, it comes at the cost of removing pretty much all of the detail from the image. So I'm going to go back and set that back to 0.1. Generally, what the process is with this is that you should start setting it to something like 0.1. Then if that's not enough, go to 0.2. Then just keep going until you get remove most of the jagged edges from your image, but keep most of the detail. So the image layers, all of them simply use the features of this image base layer in conjunction with the features specific to each of the layer types. For instance, if I switch this to an image additive layer, you can see that the height map image, image source, normalize input, interpolation smoothing, height scale, and detail smoothing from the image base layer are still there, but it also has the additive amount, remove base noise, and restrict area properties that you saw before in the Perlin additive layers. So all of the image additive, image subtractive, and image detail layers you use in a similar way to how you would use their Perlin noise equivalents. So that brings us to the conclusion of this tutorial on topography layers. Thank you for watching.